scholarship with our moderator, Joel Curtis, Professor of Economics and Finance at SUNY Buffalo State. I'll let Joel take it away from here. Thank you.
Okay, hi, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for organizing the conference, Rohan. It's really been fun. So this is our roundtable with the leaders of MMT in terms of scholarship, so I'm very excited about it. So we have first Bill Mitchell, who's Professor of Economics at the University of Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia. He's a co-founder of MMT and co-author of the MMT textbook. Other recent books that he's written have included Reclaiming the State and The Years of Dystopia. He's also the director of COFI, the Center for Full Employment and Equity. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about the vision and plans for the Foundation for Monetary Studies and MMT Ed, and basically the future of MMT education and the vision for a scholarship in MMT that you would like to see. Like, where would you like us to start working, you know? After that, we're going to have Zdravka Todorova, who's Professor and Chair of the Economics Department at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. She's the author of Money and Households in a Capitalist Economy, a gendered post-Keynesian institutional approach. She's a recipient of the International Veblen Award, which is jointly awarded by the EAEPE in Athens. She was the president of the Association for Institutional Thought and presently serves as a trustee for the Association for Social Economics. That's going to be followed, and Zdravka is going to tell us a little bit about how we can integrate gender into MMT, post-Keynesian theories of money, production, and employment, the role of the job guarantee and social provisioning, and any other MMT insights that we can bring into our research in that respect. On the panel, we also have Martha McCluskey, who is a research scholar and professor of law emerita at the SUNY Buffalo. She's the president of the Association for the Promotion of Political Economy and the Law Appeal, which you probably saw these materials from them, an officer of ClassCrits, a scholarly network for critical analysis of law and inequality, and a member scholar of the Center for Progressive Reform. So she's going to be talking to us a little bit about recent developments in law and economics, the emerging field of legal scholarship of money, the connections between Legal Academy and MMT Research Project, and any new areas like feminist legal thought, legal structures, crisis and production, and more. And then finally, last but not least, we have Professor Scott Ferguson, who's Associate Professor of Film and Media Studies in the Department of Humanities and Cultural Studies at the University of South Florida. He co-directs the Modern Money Network Humanities Division and serves as research scholar for the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. His writings appeared in publications such as Screen, Boundary 2, Arcade, Keep Howlin', Counter Punch, Liminalities, and Naked Capitalism. His book, Declarations of Dependence, Money Aesthetics, and the Politics of Care, was published at the University of Nebraska Press in 2018. So Scott's going to be able to tell us a little bit more about the achievements and trajectory of the Modern Monetary Network and the future plans for expansion, any areas for cross-disciplinary MMT work, and research within the humanities. So it's really an honor to be able to help facilitate, moderate this panel of top of the charts MMT scholars. So really looking forward to seeing where we can go, the kind of vision that is provided by these people about where we can go with MMT. So everybody's going to get 10 minutes to talk, and then we'll open it up, 10-15, okay? Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Joanne, and my fellow panelists. And you might see me do a quick exit a bit later because I've got to catch a flight later, so I apologise profusely. It's not a disdain or anything, it's just logistics. I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to get back to New York. I thought I'd start with just a bit of context, and in part this reflects some of the things that I've been hearing in the last 3 days, and so some context. My motivation has always been to analyse things at a structural level as opposed to an individual level. I look at systems and I think about systems either failing or working. Now they obviously have ramifications for individuals, but I never want to start at the individual because I think that can take you down tracks of asserting causality at the individual level when the causality is actually structural and system. And hence, I became a macroeconomist rather than a microeconomist. A little bit of background to get the context of where my role at the beginning of MMT came from, because I've been hearing some comments about MMT in the last few days, and they're repeating comments that I think are inaccurate. So I started off in the post-war period in the baby boom era, growing up in a very poor housing commission estate in Melbourne, Victoria. Housing commission is state housing, and it was it was the state providing a roof for the baby boomers after the war and their soldiers and their families. And these were really quite austere circumstances. And by the time I'd ended high school, in my last year of high school, I think 6 of the 10 most wanted men grew up within a kilometre of my house. Now it might have been 5 or 7, but I think it was 6. So this was a disadvantaged post-war housing estate in Melbourne. But the things that were really important were full employment, welfare state, and public education. And even though I came from rather restricted circumstances, to say the least, my father could always work at the minimum wage, manual worker minimum wage. My mother used to get cash payments after second year of high school, fourth year of high school, and then to take to university for the children, so that we could stay at school, and a few dollars kept us at school. And the public education system, combining with the welfare state, was really important to give us. Each year I'd line up and get free books and rubbers and pencils and paper and uniforms that we had to wear in Australia. And these were important, inclusive ways that Australia was providing in that social democratic era for upward mobility out of the poverty of the post-war period. And so now I'm in the high income groups, very well educated, of Australian society. But I've never forgotten that that's my roots and that's where my solidarity lies. And in those days, we never thought about school to work pathways. Even though I grew up in that sort of environment, I never thought about unemployment because we could always get a pathway. And then the kids we all had different aptitudes, and the kids could go into factories or administrative jobs and make their way. We had state-provided apprenticeship schemes, so kids who had aptitudes, with bolts and spatial abilities and carpentry abilities could get solid careers, and characters like me could go to university and get those sort of careers. And even though I loved pulling my motorbike apart, I always managed to strip a thread or two when I put it back together. So my aptitude wasn't to be a mechanic, even though I thought that would be a pretty cool thing to do. So those pathways were all consistent with the social democratic era that gave us upward mobility. Now, clearly in those days there were excluded groups, and they were the Indigenous Australians. And they remain excluded today. And so I'm fiercely aware of that, and I've done a lot of work in remote communities, and I'm still working on those issues. Now then you come along, and by the time I was at university, neoliberalism arrived, and the Academy of Monetarism had come along and displaced the Keynesian orthodoxy, and the policy regime was shifting to what we now know to be neoliberalism, which has become accentuated in all of our walks of life. When I started studying economics, there was massive dissonance in my mind. I knew that the body of work, the neoclassical body of work, couldn't possibly be right. That there had to be something about it. And because I was good at mathematics, it was terribly easy to pass the neoclassical curriculum, and it gave me plenty of time to read about political scientists, science, philosophy, philosophy of science, sociology, and I learned about power and elites because I wanted to put together why we're learning this crap in economics. And I fairly quickly learned that it was reinforcing the poverty and the class divide that I'd come out of. And that became accentuated, of course, in the neoliberal era because of the breakdown of all of those institutions, those social democratic institutions that I described earlier, that gave kids like me from that estate upward mobility so that we could become professors and have reasonable lives, material lives. And so that motivated my way of thinking about economics. I was always a dissenter, and as I went up into the years of university, my mission was to work out technical ways in which the mainstream was wrong, and that's been my agenda. And the first MMT moment for me came in 1978, even though I didn't know it was an MMT moment. In my fourth year at Melbourne University, I was studying agricultural economics, and I came up with a buffer stock to have full employment and price stability. It was in the context of a wool price stabilisation scheme. I was studying agriculture. And so that's my first MMT moment, that thesis I wrote in my fourth year. Then the second MMT moment was in 1994. I met up with Randy and Matt and Warren had also been working with Catalina, and then Warren had come up with his employment of last resort idea, and we were quite independent. It was true unity of science, and in that bulletin board that we were on, Warren and I worked out that we had a real coalescence of ideas from different backgrounds, different logic, different ways of coming. And for me, that was the start of my involvement in what we now call MMT. And then in 2004, I mentioned the other day, I started my blog, and I thought social media was the way forward. It wasn't just in my mind to provide a way around the academic discourse. I also conceived that, given my roots and my loyalty to my roots and the solidarity with my roots, that I saw it as a way that I could liberate the debate for people who my profession, my male-dominated white profession, had compartmentalised into ignorant nobodies who didn't deserve to have any say in the debate. Even though, Sean Sebastian said the other day that these small number of white men make heaps of decisions that impact upon all of us, and we don't get a voice in that. Now, there's a lot more than a small number. There's a whole multitude of industrial and financial elites, typically white males, but they're behind the scenes as well. But the point about my blog was designed as a mass education device to liberate people from those compartments that my profession was putting them in other words, saying, don't have a voice, you're ignorant, you don't know the maths, you don't know the models, piss off. Yet we're the ones and so that's what I thought about my blog. And so that's what I see as my purpose, the mass education. I still believe in the power of education. Education liberated me from poverty and ignorance. And I still see mass education as the way forward to promote and to extend our understandings of MMT. And so we do get power in the political process to take on my profession and the elites that my profession supports to our detriment. And so the last few things I'll say, and so that's the context. Now this talk, which is a 2-minute talk, if you've got the context, is that the things that I'm working on, clearly the textbook in my view has been a major I was already grey, but it would have sent me grey anyway. That's to me a major development, and I'm really happy to have made that contribution to everybody. And someone said to me, a BBC interviewer the other day in London said to me, "Oh, it's the Bible of MMT." I said, "Don't use the word Bible." It's our analytical structure. It's core MMT from the ground up, and it's designed to empower people who don't study economics formally to become better economists than those who've got PhDs from formal economics programs. You're better educated if you study the book than people with PhDs in economics. And the other thing that we've done, and then for those who read my blog will know, we've now created a foundation. And I'm now president of the US company, how about that? And Louisa is vice president and Scott's the company secretary. This is a 501c3 company. I was on the plane once coming back from Toronto to San Francisco, and I was sitting next to the guy who started the Tides Foundation in San Francisco. And what he told me was in the 70s that there were a lot of, he's an investment banker, and a lot of people in the 70s that he interacted with had progressive ideas and had heaps of cash, but wouldn't want to be known to be donating that cash to progressive ideas because it interfered with their corporate lives. And so they set up the Tides Foundation under one of these 501c3 structures, which allowed money laundering unit, which allowed these progressive rich guys and gals to give money, which then could go in an anonymous way, which could then be given to progressive causes like housing and shelter and all the rest of it in San Francisco. So the Foundation for Monetary Studies is now created. It's one of those sort of organisations, and we're soliciting money. Why? Because my next big venture, which I've been talking about for about a year and a half or 2 years, is what I'm now calling MMT Ed. It was going to be called MMT University, but I can't use the word university because of various legal matters. So MMT Ed is going to be an economics MMT institution where we teach people economics, MMT, where we go and run master classes in capital cities all around the world, and where we will ultimately hope to articulate the courses into formal programs within universities and take over economics departments ultimately.
Yeah.
So that's my role. My role is indicative of the commitment I have to my roots and my solidarity with the roots. And that's my purpose, to liberate us from ignorance and to give us real power against my profession and the people that my profession supports. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bill. This is Varga.
To Ed for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. Also, thank you for the organizers for this truly interdisciplinary conference. I will start first by saying what's my main point, which is basically I've argued that modern money theory introduces more nuances in heterodox economics, and it deepens the recognition of diverse forms of sociality, and this is my current work. But that work started a long time ago, and so I'll give you also some context. Initially, I was interested in building bridges across different heterodox approaches, and so my first book, and before that the dissertation, was a gender post-Keynesian institutional theory, and central to that was the charter theory of money. And so I really like Scott's definition of MMT as, the opening of the imagination, and that's what it did for me in 2004, 5, or 6, or 7 when everything was published. And so part of that was actually dealing with connecting the insights from the development monetary theory within charter theory to gender studies. And I used as a starting point the work actually of Martin Forstater and connected that to some anthropological literature, for example, Dorothy Hodgson, who did work on the effect of the taxation and introduction of money onto the different forms of households and the change of gender relations within Kenya. And so this was the beginning of my journey. So fast forward 10 years after, remember I was in the project of connecting post-Keynesian institutionalists and feminist economics. But after 10 years, I have evolved into a different project, which is thinking about heterodox economics paradigm. And the point for me that I'm going to tell you about was the heterodox handbook edited by Winchester, Taki Joy, and Carlo De Politi that came in 2018 and asked me to write entry on households. And so that was the most difficult paper because I had to build on all the approaches. And at that time, I came up with what are the common starting points for all heterodox approaches. And I basically listed 4 or 5, I think 4, and also wanted to add that all heterodox approaches should be looking critically at the theory of money as the 5th approach. But editors were not happy, or they were at least concerned that not everybody within a heterodox tradition actually adopted charter money, or modern money at that time already that it was called. And so I was actually okay with that because what I realized is that each of the foundational elements of heterodox theory actually can embed insights from the theory of money that I have studied. I will just briefly refer to those starting points for heterodox theory of households so that you think about them. So the first and most important is below the surface analysis of exchange, but also beyond monetary production. Well, this is basically looking at the economy's social provisioning, not consistent only by markets. Then multifaceted humans with living bodies and social provisioning within ecosystems. Then individuality and diversity. This is referring to the differences and the various processes and agencies, as well as the various oppressions. And class power and capabilities, I'm lumping them all together, all these points. I thought that all of these basically more or less are the center of all different heterodox approaches. What I'm seeing, that understanding money in the way that modern money theory has done, in fact, enlightens the understanding of the diverse forms of socialities within economics. So I very briefly will try to talk about that. So that could be dissected in 2 main things. And the first one is debt. Debt actually matters, and what kind of debt? Not only government versus private debt, which has been well discussed in modern money, but also I want to stress the debt as a monetary debt versus non-monetary obligation. So debt is an obligation in monetary unit of account that is counted and measured, transferred, but there is also these other obligations. They're both social, and they're both based in hierarchies like gender, age, and so on. Both are part of the economic relations, as we recognize that money is debt credit, denominated in unit of account. We see it as social and not asocial or opposed to society. But we also recognize that there are different debts, that we can say they're obligations. So this is just one example of kind of a broader understanding of money as debt, but also looking as debt is a different side of debt in terms of social obligations. And so when we speak of non-monetary obligation, then that brings me, of course, further to make distinctions between obligations and reciprocity. Of course, in reciprocity, there is some organizing principle of a notion of equity and keeping track, even though not at this one point of time. But also to distinguish it from exchange and gift. And I think that those distinctions are rooted deeply in our actually understanding the complex story of money. And this also brings me to the notion to complicate gift. And so when we say gift is not associated only with positive things, and I mean, if we can think even in terms of exploit in the context of gift, but all of those diverse forms of socialities, we can call them, are linked directly to an understanding of money that is not as money as a commodity. So then the nature of money is actually, it should be always at the center of modern money theory. I have heard prominent economists say that this is just like an accessory and not essential to modern money theory. I think this is the key to connect to all the heterodox schools of thought as well as to other disciplines. And so the nature of money is central. And that is the way to expand modern money theory in humanities and everything else. So also, I want to stress and actually repeat what actually was said yesterday, I think by Scott Fulwarden, and that is very obvious that all of this means that modern money theory is not just about money and spending. It is about the ability to distinguish diverse forms of sociality and the permission to distinguish real resources from ceremonial constraints of power, which brings me to how well seated institutional economics is within this body of thought, and for me also that was an essential part of my inquiries. So a good start of the a good start for all of this expansion of modern money is actually to look at the works that were inspired by chattel money, and I'm referring to my colleagues now who were students when I was a student and that worked in this line and that have actually done work in the history of money and related also to anthropology and so on. And just to give you an example, and something to look forward to at the ASSA, there will be a panel on the different contexts of gift and money. And that panel is comprised by actually not only early, but alumni of those who studied chartalism. And just to give you an example, for example, Scott McConnell is going to discuss rice stone and banknotes. The El-Tumin complementary currency in Mexico will be discussed by Carol Vasquez. Origins of money in ancient Greece by Ala Seminova. And dowry in South Asia by Kalpana Kanal and Luchira Sen. And those are people that have consistently and continuously developing their work, and this is just a small example. What I want to point out is that there is one missing element here of what we have heard in the past days, and this is the work that actually was developed by heterodox economists that were either schooled directly by modern money theory before it was called that, or indirectly also inspired, and that is directly using interdisciplinary approaches from history and anthropology and so on. So the final thing that I want to read, I will point out that all of this work for me was in the context of micro and macro relations. Yesterday we heard about the micro foundations, and I think that it's an essential part of the modern money project to consider heterodox micro foundations, and just also another point that in fact that has evolved into a micro-macro linkages. It's not particularly a mirror of the micro foundations of the neoclassical economics, and to connect the heterodox microeconomic development to the modern money theory is also actually a project that has been worked on by others in heterodox economics, and I think this is also a good direction. I think I will stop with that.
Thank you, Martha.
Okay, well thanks. I consider myself a little more of a fellow traveler venturing into MMT land, which has just been a wonderful, exciting exploration. So what I'm saying here is a bit exploratory. And what I want to do is talk about legal perspectives on money, but what does MMT bring to law, and what can law do, more law do for MMT? So here's some, I've been involved with some groups that are bringing MMT to legal academia, and I especially appreciate the Modern Money Network folks, and Appeal is another group I'm involved with, and Classic Grits. We featured MMT presentations frequently, and a lot of excitement and interest among law faculty. Okay, so why bring MMT to legal academia? Because legal academia is a major producer of economic ideology and policy. The law and economics movement in the US has been hailed by its proponents as a very successful 30-year plus investment with a very good return on equity. It's, for example, many of you know this story, and there's plenty more details to it, but from the 70s to the early 2000s, the Olin Foundation was the lead of investing tens of millions of dollars to establish law and economics centers, strictly neoclassical, free market, right wing, in virtually every national law school in the US. It was inspired by the founders' antagonists and upset at the fact that universities were demanding things like African American studies. And so it's been since then joined by many, many major right-wing funders, foundations, corporate donations, and although one of the founding fathers, Richard Posner, said it would be absurd to attribute law and economics influence to its funding rather than its pure merit. Anyway, so an article from earlier this year, another related investment in legal academia has been the Federalist Society, which is a little broader than strict economics, but its central premise is about promoting the free market ideology within law schools. And this article says the legal left has a money problem, a history problem, and worst of all, a big idea problem. So my question, I probably can't see it down there, for MMT, can you solve the legal left's money problem with big ideas about money, even though you probably with much less money? Okay. Another important feature of legal academia's production of economic ideology is the George Mason University Law and Economics education, so-called programs. They have trained just I think the vast majority of judges in the United States have been trained by these programs. They have trained a large portion, if not the majority, of law faculty within the United States and increasingly around the world. In just the next 2 months, they have 10 conferences for judges or legal professionals, including some on just an introduction to economics, consumer protection, specialized things, fintech, labor, business law. And now they're also trying to market free online courses to law schools that are struggling to support faculty and laying off faculty, so students can get their direct education. So can MMT please develop a guerrilla guide to George Mason Law and Economics de-education? It'd be great if the judges and attorney generals and congressional staff and law professors who are getting this message could get something else. So this gives you a taste. Here's a textbook that they typically use in their judicial education programs. It starts off on the very first paragraph saying, just as a physicist must take into account the effects of gravity, so too must a lawyer understand the effects of economic forces. In a very real sense, economic forces are the gravity of the social world, often invisible but omnipresent. And then the next paragraph goes on to say, economics is not really about money, it's about incentives influencing behavior. Second, it's not about macroeconomics really, it focuses on microeconomics, and that's all they focus on pretty much, which is based on individual decision makers and individual markets. And it says, by the way, if you're interested in macro, economists don't agree on it, they do agree on micro, so let's focus on that. Orthodox law and economics teachings, basically my distillation of what this is about. I haven't been to one, but our colleague Yuil has been to one of them. Economics is about individual behavioral incentives driven by naturalized scarcity. Opportunity costs are everything. That means inevitable trade-offs. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, except that they do pay generously if you want to attend one. Basically, the essence of human power and freedom is individually deciding what to sacrifice. If law tries to reduce human suffering by changing economic power, we're going to make that suffering worse. Economic actors naturally react to counter any change in the law. The result is harmful unintended consequences from incentives that are governed by economic laws. Harm doesn't come from intended fraud, predation, lawlessness, inadequate justice. It's from unintended consequences of incentive effects from these forces of gravity. So therefore, we have to solve inequality and social and economic problems with fiscal policy, not law. But of course, we can't do very much with fiscal policy because that involves tough trade-offs too. And special interests always get mixed up with any spending costs, so we can't really spend much publicly. So law needs to be guided by efficiency, not justice or planetary survival. Maximizing, not redividing an economic pie of formalized, monetized gain is the main focus that it's telling judges they have to do. So why would all these corporate funders and right-wing powerhouses invest so much, particularly in judges and law professors who spend most of their time on so-called private law rules of contract, property, tort, civil procedure, corporations? Why? Because private law rules, they know, constitute and justify the imagined economic pie of aggregate private monetized gain. These rules form the Code of Capital, the title of a very important book by Katerina Pistor. These rules regulate the distribution and power of money. Christine Bassan has written about that. Private law rules distribute liquidity, which in turn shapes market prices. These rules mask unjust private power as private free choice. My challenge to MMT, that I'm hoping to hear more of from the legal perspective, is how can we take MMT into more of the weeds of these basic legal rules, so-called private law, decentralized law? And I know, obviously, Nathan Tankers, Rowan Gray, Louis Wheel, and Raul Carrillo have been leaders in venturing into this territory, but I think there's a lot more to be done. How do we democratize this power? This power of the private law rules, as Lewis said yesterday, is a delegation of power from the state. I think it's an example of what Scott Ferguson was saying, that we can't think of legal power over money in terms of sovereignty. There are layers of interdependence. Law is never sovereign, really, entirely. The degree of sovereignty depends on political and legal governance structures. I think that was something that Brook mentioned yesterday in his talk, but I haven't heard a lot of exploration of that at MMT. Janin Mudad is an economics scholar who is focused on the importance of developing legal capacity. Code of Capital, Katrina Pistor's book, taxation can't be the main strategy against an economy designed for inequality, instability, and extraction. Private law rules creating capital operates as a system of unequal substantive legal rights to basically impose non-reciprocal costs on others and to evade, resist, and change law, including invading, resisting, and changing the power to tax. Economic power is coded through the liberal so-called rule of law, basic principles of contract and property. These codes of capital, coded into the basic principles of law, just create and distribute wealth through legal qualities of durability, universality, convertibility to money, and priority over competing rights. And lawyers pervasively, corporate lawyers and lawyers for the wealthy, pervasively fashion these legal principles into unequal legal institutions like corporations, bankruptcy law, trusts, collateral, and then those are further protected by international legal regime. They're developed in a decentralized, incremental kind of bottom-up, but not democratic, very anti-democratic process of case-by-case judicial decisions, and then they're later adopted in public policy, typically. So this privatized governance of money happens through these basic legal rules of private microeconomic transactions. So MMT, another challenge to MMT is how do we develop the public power over money in a way that reclaims this power to craft the code of capital? And I would say that includes major public investments in law, democratic law, law for the people, including public interest law, investments in legal academia, in public law enforcement, and in terms of civil regulatory law. All of these private rights of action, because without legal capacity, the other rights and the other powers to regulate money won't happen. Here's a question, I guess. To what extent are these private law rules, which really govern money in one layer of the governance of money, to what extent can they operate as non-fiscal pay-fors? Tort and criminal law, going beyond some of the things you mentioned yesterday, punishing, not deterring, not compensating its extractive gain, I think could be a way, a pay-for really. Democratizing decentralized governance of liquidity through creative approaches to trust, cooperative firms, and Nathan's worked on that. And thinking of equality as a pay-for more broadly in law. And then finally, this is more exploratory. It seems to me that when you focus on these microeconomics of MMT from a legal perspective, recognizing that law constructs these transactions, seems to me that there's a non-monetized currency of exchange that we have to reckon with as we control money. Because one of the dominant law and economics messages is we have to give people money, not legal rights. So that makes, because if we give people money, it's not as paternalistic, it's flexible, it's cheaper, less transaction costs. Well, there must be something going on here if that's their argument. And then, of course, at the regulatory level, cost-benefit analysis, we could use money to compare and quantify and aggregate goals. Well, money, I guess my take on this would be that money itself doesn't fully determine or measure microeconomic power. Market transactions always involve currencies like race and gender status. The value of your money depends on access to particular channels of law enforcement and protection of your rights to contract property, and the interdependent systems in which your assets exist. Money's legal nature means it's not a fungible, standardized unit of account, really. Money buys power outside of money often to limit the value of others' money in these microeconomic transactions. And that has resulted in a neoliberal economy where basically microeconomic transactions take place not really as the market monetized exchange, but as relationships of personal and political servitude and speculation, really. So that's.
Hello, everybody. Thank you to my fellow panelists and to the audience for having me. So I'm here to talk about the humanities. I'm going to try to not speak so much on behalf of myself, but instead on behalf of the nonprofit organization most of you know runs, organized this conference, the Modern Money Network. And round of applause. And I am one of the core co-founders of the humanities division of the Modern Money Network, where we are trying to develop interdisciplinary dimensions of MMT, incorporating economics, incorporating law, but bringing it into the various humanities disciplines. We, so far, have put on scholarly conferences. We have, as some of you know, monthly podcasts. And also, we do various kinds of public education, from the classroom to communities and beyond. The core founding group are myself, William Stoss, and Maximilian Seho. We don't really have a formal organization, a formal membership structure at this juncture, but we have, I would say, many fellow travelers in our expanding network. That includes some folks who are joining us in a more, they're engaged with us and kind of helping to staff our various efforts. This includes Megan Stoss, Alex Williams, Andres Bernal, and Richard Farrell. Some of these folks are here today. So a little bit about the humanities, just to kind of provide a very easy definition of the humanities. What we do in the humanities is we study and we think about social and aesthetic, meaning sensuous, forms, and we think about them in the past, in the present, and always, we don't study future forms because they don't exist yet, but we study past and present forms with an eye toward the future, or what future forms might be, how they can be, and we often do so with, at least in the critical humanities, with a critical eye, looking for essentially the implicit values, the injustices, the contradictions, the tensions, and also the possibilities and the potentials that we would say inhere in our social and aesthetic forms. And we interpret, we analyze, we teach, we write, we think, and we hope that we participate in creating a richer, a broader sense of everything from money to, let's say, music and the movies. The humanities nowadays encompasses a lot of things. The humanities itself is kind of wildly interdisciplinary. We're still doing, this does not exhaust the list, but we're still doing things that we've been doing for a long time, like literature and language studies, visual culture, but we're also looking at science and technology, music, dance, rhetoric and communication, history, philosophy, theology, space and place studies. That includes ecology and environmental studies. What else? Critical race studies, feminist theory, queer theory, transgender theory, post-colonial theory, disability studies, food studies, the list goes on and on. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of the wide range of things that we do in the humanities, and especially the critical humanities. So this was already said previously, using the language of accessory, right? So our argument in the humanities division is that the humanities are not a mere accessory. They're not just add-ons to the MMT project, or at least that's our claim and that's our gambit. Instead, we want to say that the humanities are central to the modern monetary theory project. And when we look at social and aesthetic forms, when we think about the technology and materiality of oil paint and the way it arose in history, and that it's linked to the rise of modern individualism and the heroic artists who can work with these very quick brushstrokes with this paint that doesn't dry right away. Or we're thinking about the development of Renaissance linear perspective, or we're thinking about the representation of gender in, let's say, the 19th century in French painting. Or we're thinking about the way that painting situates us as spectators of particular kinds of gazes that we might be aware of or not aware of. All of these questions that we ask about social form are imbued with the problem of money. And we think that MMT opens up these questions in a new way, and we have developed lots of disciplinary, analytical, critical languages that can be very helpful to, let's say, develop and complicate MMT beyond the boundaries of and the languages of economics and law. And I think that MMT does this. It invites this because it, more so than any other approach, and of course MMT is a synthesis, right? But any other synthetic approach to money, I think that it screams that money is a social, thoroughly, emphatically social relationship. What do I mean by this? We can compare it to the mainstream neoclassical view, and we all are familiar with the myth of barter. And the myth of barter, right, kind of presumes this asociality. It typically presumes that money comes from private exchanges, often at the outskirts of the community. We did a podcast with the historian Julie Mell, who actually links this myth of barter to all kinds of anti-Semitic tropes in the history of the modern West. So we have this in the mainstream, a conception of money as somehow asocial or outside of the social or not thoroughly socially constituted. And what the mainstream wants to do is it wants to cordon off money. It wants to say, well, it's this kind of other thing, this narrow space, and it's the same, it's really just the market. It's just the private market, and it has its own rules. It has its own rules of supply and demand, and we've got this, and we've got the tools, and we've got the mathematics, and we can make sense of these social and aesthetic forms, and no one in the law or no one in the humanities really should have anything to offer here. And when MMT begins with what is often called the fiscal tax relation, or the tax-driven money argument, I think it begins with a genuinely macro, political, social argument. And it tells us that money is thoroughly social. I think I'm going to go past all of this so that I can get to, okay. So what I want to suggest is that in telling us, in really emphatically telling us that money is so thoroughly social, MMT sort of reveals the economics profession to basically be this silly, kind of play space that really doesn't have much to tell us, at least neoclassical economics. And it makes it possible to kind of deflate this high castle of economics and let the concerns of the humanities kind of rush in and start making sense of these problems that haven't really been considered from the humanities. So in terms of the relationship between MMT and the humanities that I think we're after in the humanities division, we think of it as, we don't want to collapse the two. The MMT economists got to do what they're doing, we got to do what we're doing. But I think we like to imagine this as a form of reciprocal illumination, and not just flat application or a flat transfer of one idea from one discipline to another. But there's going to be mutual illumination and maybe defamiliarization on either side. One way to think about this that I find helpful, it's not the only way to think about it, is to think about media in the broadest sense. And I typically define what we do in the humanities as really we all do media studies. We all are interested in how media shape and organize our lives, whether it's painting or it's algorithms or it's architecture, etc. And what media do is they mediate, right? They involve processes of mediation. Now, the humanities is pretty sophisticated in the way it thinks about media, and it always insists that media or mediation is always actively constituting and organizing our social, material, ecological realities. 2 minutes, oh boy. We argue that there's no medium that is passive or neutral in any way. So we think that our tools and our insistence on this sort of mediation, this kind of active, political way of organizing the world can help the MMT project. Whether it's working with and extending some of Roman Gray's work about digital currencies and Facebook's Libra and its attempts to kind of basically take over the world through its digital currency, right? That digital currency is an active way of constituting the world, and it's an aesthetic as well, right? And our whole, the entire aesthetic of Facebook and our phenomenological interactions with Facebook are things that humanity will think about a whole lot. I'm going to keep skipping along. So reciprocally in the other direction, I think MMT has a lot to teach the humanities, and it's not just how money works. I think it really messes with our a lot of our assumptions. And I think it's because while we are so sophisticated at thinking about media in this really complicated, constitutive way, we just constantly see through money. We just try to look through it to find just the exchanges that are behind it. The whole thing gets sort of swallowed in this private exchange relationship. So I think what MMT challenges us to do in humanities is to actually follow through on our own commitments and to look at money as something that is constitutively organized in the world and can be otherwise, and in fact is irreducible to something like exchange. Okay, let's see, I'll end with some of the projects that we're doing in the Modern Money Network. So we put on our first big conference, which we called Money on the Left, Word, Image, Praxis at the University of South Florida. And that was a kind of shockingly stunning success, or at least I thought so. We had all kinds of folks from all kinds of disciplines and all over the world coming to this. Matthew Forstetter was our keynote speaker. We featured a remote conversation with the former Hawaii State Representative and Democratic Socialist candidate for Congress, Connie Alabama. We spoke with my friend, the actor-director Joseph Gordon-Levitt, about MMT and art and online collaborative art making. From here, we went on to create a podcast where we feature conversations. Really, we were just trying to use the energy of the conference and make it a kind of regular monthly conversation where we're continuing to explore MMT's potentials through this kind of humanities-based interdisciplinary lens. I'm going to stop, but let me just say, and so more recently, we were able to hook up with Monthly Review Online, and they're now hosting us, and this is a major boost of confidence for us. And I had so much more to say, but I'm going to be done. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to all the panelists. This is like a really exciting panel to be part of. I want to maybe just open it up directly for questions because we only have about 15 minutes. And if you have questions for Bill, I would ask you to ask those first, and then we can move on from there.
Questions? Someone who hasn't asked a question in this conference? Yeah, sure.
Hello. I'm very interested in China, and a lot of the things that I follow and the financial people I follow are very worried about the debt that China has. Can you give me a comment on that? Do you think that's going to cause problems down the road, or any comments on that?
I might just ask if we could make sure we can speak at it and get a question about the future of scholarship, maybe what we need. No, it's okay. I'm just saying what we can think about as research questions about that, maybe, or how those kinds of changing large demographics could. Yeah, if you want to.
In the interest of time, the answer is no. It can always mean its liabilities in that currency, and it issues no private debt. There's private debt within the Chinese economy. Private debt's always a problem for sovereign rich, but the state debt's not a problem.
Another question? Yeah.
There are two massive housing bubbles in the world right now, Canada and Australia. I was wondering if MMT has a comment on the personal and household debt that led to those housing bubbles.
One of the things that I think our work has highlighted is the linkage between the sectors in the economy. Because we've often heard that there's too much debt, and even progressive commentators and economists say that there's too much state debt and too much private debt. And of course the two given the current institutional relationships, are fundamentally linked. And private debt's always a problem. And in Australia, we've had, in 1996, the Conservative Liberal government took over. They ran successive fiscal surpluses until 2007, increasing in as a proportion of GDP. And of course, this was held out as being the exemplar of fiscal responsibility. And the only way they could run those surpluses was because growth kept going, even though there was fiscal drag from the surpluses. And the only reason growth kept going was because they simultaneously deregulated the financial market. And you get credit cards in, 4-year-olds would get credit cards in the mail with $20,000 credit limits. Your son solicited pumping out by the rise of what I call financial engineers. And the household debt in Australia went from about 60% of disposable income to 180% during those years. And if we hadn't had that rise in household debt, the fiscal surpluses would have been impossible. The economy would have been in recession in 1997 or 8. And so what I think MMT has, our work has been able to show is that those things are intrinsically linked. If the household, if the government is pursuing a strategy of fiscal surplus, and in Australia's case we have an external deficit of about 3.5% of GDP since 1970s, then the pursuit of a fiscal surplus will always drive the private domestic sector, which is a user of the currency, into increasing debt. And that's an unsustainable growth strategy. And it's something as citizens we should be railing against and forcing the governments to run fiscal deficits to finance our capacity to avoid those high levels of indebtedness. So, and in Australia's case and Canada's case, of course, that indebtedness went into the housing bubbles, which then created a massive housing affordability crisis. And that's also linked to the fiscal services, because one of the ways in which the government pursued fiscal austerity, and still doing it, was to starve public capital investment into what we call state housing, low-income housing, and forcing the low-income groups to compete in the private housing markets, getting pumped full of debt they couldn't afford to repay. And that's all linked to this fiscal austerity obsession.
And to follow up on the focus on gender and households, does it make sense to think about that connection? If you have austerity policies at the fiscal level, you're basically creating a sort of pull that's subsidizing the economy through the unpaid labor that's gendered within the household and putting more and more burdens in that kind of debt. It's a different kind of debt.
Yes, and if you're interested to look at the case of Eastern Europe and the social transformation taking place, private household debt that basically became new phenomena that did not exist. But it's not just about debt and the interest payments, it's also about changing the social structure of the household, the relations, away from this gift and social obligation and to direct it towards actually servicing the private debt, as well as the ownership of houses, which becomes more and more a luxury.
I have a question about sort of the relationship with MMT and philosophy, because I've heard Bill and others talk about how MMT is non-ideological and it's sort of neutral and descriptive, when I think like one of the main problems with neoclassical economics is the obsession to naturalize itself to be a science and to ignore questions of ethics and distributive justice. So I guess I'm sort of wondering how all of you see the relationship between philosophy, distributive justice, ethics, and the role of ethics in the study of economics.
look, it's a very complicated thing because where you start discussing subjectivity, and I'm sure that humanities here are better at this than me, but when I studied philosophy, there were all these debates about what subjectivity is, and just the concept of money is subjective. So when I say that MMT really is a lens, it's an understanding framework. Of course, there's values even embedded in that, and you can end up reducing the argument always to what's the meaning of life, and you don't get very far that way. So there's an abstraction I understand when I say that, and then focus on questions of distributive justice and ethics and those things. MMT, what I say is that MMT doesn't really comment on those things. But to make commentary on those things in an informed way, you need to have an understanding of the monetary system and the institutional structures and the capacities of that system. That's what I say. But to operationalise that understanding of advancing philosophical concepts of ethics and justice and those things, you need to have more than just that monetary understanding. Because what in crude terms a right-wing will think is distributive justice is quite different to what I would think is being distributive justice. But I don't think you get very far in those philosophical discussions unless, in the context of this application, unless you have an understanding. Because I think if you start talking about distributive justice and you still believe that the currency issuer is financially constrained, well then you're going to then go down a route that won't take you very far, because it has meaning and adds to knowledge. That's my view.
It's a great question, and I'm interested in sort of joining MMT to another project that I focus on, which is feminist legal scholar Martha Feynman's sort of philosophical shift within law from the liberal subject of the autonomous rational individual to the vulnerable subject, not ranking degrees of vulnerability, but the nature of the human condition is one of interdependence. We are embodied, we are embedded in social, ecological webs. And so going from there, I think this fits with Scott's work as well. MMT, I think, beautifully takes apart that idea of the economy as a market of individualized, rational, maximizing exchanges, and situates all economic activity in this kind of interdependence. To get the power, interdependence and collective action is not a sacrifice or an opposition to individual agency and freedom. It is the ground of it, but that requires taking control of the institutions of collective action like money.
Hi, sorry. Briefly, just, of course, the discipline of economics has moved precisely in this direction, away from value judgment and questions of social justice. But broadly beyond economics, the so-called neoliberal thought collective, using the phrase by Philip Mirovsky, does something different, which is basically reducing any social problem, questions of justice and so on, to a market solution, and that goes beyond economics. I think modern money theory can provide a kind of alternative beyond also economics, but we are not going to call it a thought collective, right? We are more evolutionary.
So I will second everything that's been said. My work converges with everybody's here. I've come to Martha Feynman rather late after I wrote my book, but I'm now very influenced by her. So my quick line about is MMT neutral or just descriptive, or is it political or not political? I might get disagreement, but my line now is it is thoroughly political, but it is not partisan. That's how I put it. I don't know if that's satisfactory. Because it involves the polis, and it's an articulation of the polis, and it's a macro articulation of the polis that starts, as Bill said, with the social and the structural rather than the individual. And that's a choice. I will say that I affirm the spirit of what you say, Bill, because I do think we need to make truth claims. I think we need to say, this is how it works. So,
truth is political.
Indeed, yeah. And then I'll maybe tease out a thread that I was feeling here. We're going to state something that I think was implicit, is that I think what MMT does is it doesn't give us or orient us to one particular ethical philosophy or one particular philosophy or another, or politic over another, but that it reopens a whole set of questions that have been either poorly asked or asked a long time ago in different ways in different contexts, and then we need to go to those contexts and kind of recuperate whether it's pre-modern or outside of the modern Western tradition, or little gems that remain within the modern Western tradition. But so I see it as a provocation and an opening and a kind of momentum, rather than some kind of positivist answer. Well, MMT, because MMT, ergo this philosophy. That would be my answer to that.
I fully agree with that. And so when I say it's a lens, the very fact that, as Matt just said, it tells the truth about the capacity of our government. Just the fact that it elevates the government as the initial macro player is political and not value-free, because the very concept of a government is contested. And so, in that context, but I think it's important that it doesn't take a position on the government. It elevates the government to the central position in the monetary system as the motivator of the monetary system. But it doesn't take a position on what that government should do, but it tells us very clearly what the implications of the government doing A or B will be. And that's where you have to then say, well, which one do you want?
That's perfect. I think that's...
And on that, I'll have to apologise and leave.
So maybe just one more couple of questions, and then we'll call up. Yeah, just one more. I just have one question for the group, which I think.
Hi, this is for Professor Todorova. I'm interested in this micro. Hello. This is for Todorova. I'm interested in this micro foundations of MMT question, and I'm hoping you'll say a little bit more about that and the work of Fred Lee. What can Fred Lee add? What can MMT take from Fred Lee that we haven't yet? What can that paradigm and that methodology add for us, and what's been happening in that role with his students since then?
Before you start, I just want to ask my question so you can add them all together and we'll finish up, which is, other people I know in the room, and I'm just going to give a shout out to Ben Wilson, have been combining MMT understandings with natural sciences like food systems and doing things like putting together Natural Science Foundation grants for how local currencies could be connected to food systems and data gathering. I notice everyone here, which I helped organize the panel, are social scientists. And one thing I'm curious is, what are the potentials for collaboration in terms of pursuing common research projects, common research funding if we're going beyond the silos of the departments? And do you see a kind of hard line between the social science, natural sciences, or should we really need another panel that has all the natural scientists that's sort of 6 people long as well as social sciences together? Yeah.
I will just quickly first address the micro question. The most important thing, administered prices. The concept that Freddie worked and developed. He, of course, was interested initially in post-Keynesian theory of prices, but micro theory. But at the end, he basically concluded that it's not about the micro foundation per se, but it's about macro linkages. In that, the theory of prices is fundamentally important, and administered prices, and I think even Scott Fulweiler referred to that yesterday. There is a direct link to MMT. If you start looking at how markets are organized and created, how markets are social, we talked about money is social, markets are socially constructed, prices are administered. Once we get out of this, we get out of the price determination supposed mechanism, which is the foundation of basically a lot of the claims that markets can solve all problems. So that's a fundamental. And of course, there are other micro issues. Well, household being one, it's not just a micro, but it's a macro. And for example, the point about the local currencies, well, that's a great way also to engage in this macro explorations. As for collaboration, of course, I agree with everything that Rohan said, and I admire where is Ben's work, and recently communicated to him. And definitely, I think that we should be exploring interdisciplinary grant and research agenda.
But just saying micro foundations is not enough, because which micro foundation?
Yeah, but that's what I said, which it seems to be heterodox micro foundation, plus the micro foundation should never be a mirror to the neoclassical. We never should be falling into this, let's create the mirror of what is out there, because what's out there was designed for a purpose to be separate from the macro. So first of all, heterodox, and second, macro.
One little sliver here that's relevant again to bring up gender, but in the U.S. Legal system pretty much will not enforce contracts for money compensation within families for domestic labor, and that has a tremendous effect, I think, on the price of the market price of commodified domestic labor. So that's an interesting way in which law regulates money through contract and access to liquidity, and shapes inequality and the power of money more broadly.
Just with respect to the grants, like I think we really do need to work together. This is just something because I've been working on that a little bit. So I created a Stony Alliance, which is super cool because it's all the people who are MMTs and synthetic to MMT that might be working in SUNY, so that when we apply for grants at the level of the State University of New York system, we are like a group of about 20 people across mainly economists, but some people in history, some people in law, and at the top of their disciplines of the different areas. And so it's an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary group of people that work and can, affect some power and get money from like the Board of Trustees on a huge, like 63 campus wide university system, one of the largest in the world. So,
right, I think on that, we'll do another round of panels, another round of applause. One little bit of housekeeping. Speaking of the difference between things that are real and novel and things that require real resources, please donate your name tags back to us at the end so that we don't have to buy more next year. That'd be really appreciative. If you haven't noticed, there's cool magnets. I don't know how magnets work, but they work very well apparently, the name tags, so we'd love to keep these ones. We're going to have a little 2-minute description about another multimedia project that's going on in the community, and then we'll have a few minutes break before we start the last session. So I'd like to introduce Maren up here, who's going to chat a little bit.
Hi, sorry, so my name's Lauren Poitras. I know some of you guys, but thanks to everyone for just giving me. I'll be super brief. I just want to introduce myself and say thanks. Some of you know I'm working on a longer form documentary film project about the story of MMT, its evolution, kind of the current political context, a bit of the narrative, drama unfolding, and so I'm following some of you all, and you know that that's happening. But you know, it's going to be a big story. So it's about the historical context as well as the current, kind of the teasing out those basic assumptions, that basic conflict with neoclassical economics that the paradigm shift of MMT really represents. So, so it's a big project. I'm just saying it's not totally public yet, but I just, you know, within the community, I just kind of want to let folks know it's happening. We're very open to collaboration, communication, and suggestions. So maybe find me or just find Billy. This is Billy Sauce. We're all collaborating. So, you know, it's still in the early stages. Hopefully, we're doing filming here. We'll hopefully have a work sample we'll be able to share soon, and then it will become more public. So right now, it's not totally public, by the way. I'm still trying to get some mainstream interviews and that sort of thing. So it is a little bit quiet, but I just want to let folks know that it's happening within the community, to be very open about collaboration. And so, and hopefully it will become more public pretty soon, and maybe even be trying to push, you know, more crowdfunding, that sort of thing, any kind of funding really. And then, yeah, so just look out for that. I'm still working on a title. I can give some suggestions. We want to crowdsource the title. We'll work on that. I have a working title, but yeah, it's going well. So I'm excited about it, and I hope other folks get excited about it too. So with that, yeah, if Billy has anything to say, thanks to Billy and Chris, his brother, for helping me film. I'll be done. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that most folks in this room would agree that this is a story that ought to be told. The film is a great idea. It's, you know, going to be great. And Martin's been doing amazing work. I've seen some stuff that she's put together. It's beautiful. If you would like to know more and stay in touch about the project, there's a mailing list sign-up sheet at the money on the left table. Make sure to sign into that. And I think funders are welcome. It was part of the message as well. So if you have access to the money, I appreciate it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut in on our precious break, but I do have to do something that's very important, which is give away 4 copies of the MMT textbook based on people's trivia ability about MMT, its background, the origins, and a little bit more off the beaten path, how people met, how MMT economists ended up becoming MMT economists. So if you're interested in having a copy of an MMT textbook and you don't have it, get your MMT facts together and let's do this. First question, who was Randall Wray's dissertation grandfather? And to explain that question, dissertation grandfather is the dissertation advisor of your dissertation advisor. Well, Minsky's the father, but who was Minsky's dissertation advisor?
He had 2.
Yeah, put your hand up.
He had 2.
All right, in the back. We got Mike is coming your way.
You should give it to people who don't reach. Sam Greenstone. Put your hand up. Put your hand up. Behind.
Yeah.
Apple learner.
What?
Apple learner.
No. Sorry. In the back.
I think it was Schumpeter.
And that is yes. I'm taking it as yes. Yes, there were some technicalities I heard on the side that it's technically both Schumpeter and Wassily Leontiev, but for the purpose of this, we're accepting either one. Come up to collect your textbook. Second one. What online listserv did MMT economists get to know each other on in the 1990s? This was a little bit more of an obscure one. There? Yeah?
Is it post-Keynesian thought?
Yes.
Woo!
And this one is one that has multiple right answers. Because it's a little more obscure, so I wanted to make it, soften up a bit so you can answer with any of the multiple right answers. Name an economic association multiple MMT economists are a member of. I'm not giving it to you. If you're actually one of the members of one of the economists who's members of the organization, I'm not going to give it to you. What? And we're not doing the polity and just redistributive economy here. What? No, an economic association, like a professional membership that economists are in. It's around, it's a little obscure.
There's a person there.
There, back there. No. Hamlin, I'm gonna. Can we get? Are we doing the mic or? Hamlin, can you pass it to Hamlin?
Is it an iPad?
No, yeah, that's all. That was the same answer. That's wrong.
Rethinking economics?
No, that's also wrong. I'm not giving it to you, Michael. Not. I know I said multiple. Any of the ones that multiple MMT economists are a member of is an acceptable answer to the question. Any of them is an acceptable answer. There's not just one. There's multiple, many multiple. Any of them are an acceptable answer. Oh, this is one we should work on. People should know where the MMT economists membership is. James, yeah? I guess that does count. That wasn't one of the ones I'm thinking of, but I think that are people technically members? I'm not sure I've confirmed that multiple are members. Multiple people present. You know what? I think we're just going to come up with another question and say no. I'm not giving it to you, Michael. Sorry. I think we'll come up with another question over that one. Just for the record, get to know the associations that our economists are members of. Union for Radical Political Economy, the International Association for Feminist Economics, the Association for Social Economics,
Economists for Peace.
Economists for Peace. Yeah, that counts too. There's many more. So we were talking to people, especially people who are more involved with organizing those, like Professor Todorova. And that this is part of the MMT conversation. So the next one, this is one that's been covered in the panels this weekend. So it should be one theoretically anyone who's been here for all 3 days should be able to get. So this is just really about speed to it. What does the modern in monetary theory refer to? Right there.
When money were issued, that's when it's modern. Like when.
Well, when did that start?
When we started writing.
What time period did we say that?
Oh God, very long time ago. Modern is mean modern.
All right, we're gonna give it to you. All right, what's else? How about this one? What economics doctoral program did multiple MMT economists get a PhD from that is not UMPC?
Hey,
I'm gonna take another look at the room. The question is, what economics PhD program did multiple MMT economists get a PhD at that is not the University of Missouri, Kansas City? Do you not understand the concept of trivia? Alright, I'm gonna give it to Geoff.
The new school.
Yes, the new school. The new school. Thank you. Alright, that was a little bumpy, but still get 4 free textbooks in the community. But, you know, to be serious, you can redistribute it to someone you think should have it more than you if you want.
Yeah, we have too many.
We have multiple t-shirts that are freely available, MMT t-shirts that are freely available, that are coming on a first come, first served basis. They'll be over here. Thank you very much.
Yay!
You're not the audience.